The Australian government needed immigrants. I had heard about what was called the Assisted Passage Scheme, whereby the government would reimburse the cost of travel to Australia for people of European descent. So, after discharge from the United States Air Force, I decided to move down under. Upon arrival in Sydney, I had exactly 42 cents to my name. A representative from the Australian government met me at the airport and took me to a youth hostel. He told me my fare would be reimbursed after 2 years of residency. Fortunately, within a few days of my arrival, I found a job with United Press International. Unfortunately, I wouldn't receive any pay for over a week. Although I was permitted to stay at the hostel for a few days, ultimately I had to leave to make way for others. A Greek family rented me a room and agreed to wait until payday for the rent. Their home was in the suburb of Marrickville. UPI was located in Caldec's House, an office building near the Sydney Harbor Bridge. It was a very long walk, twice a day, made doubly difficult by the fact I had absolutely nothing to eat for my first 10 days down under. Part of my job at UPI was to tend to the needs of the newspapers, radio, and TV stations who subscribed to our news service. One person with whom I dealt frequently was Rob Mundell, who worked for our client newspaper, The Australian. After talking numerous times on the phone, Rob and I met in person and quickly became good friends. By the middle of 1967, I had accrued 5 weeks vacation at work, so Rob and I decided to take off on Walkabout through a substantial part of Australia, mostly camping along the way. We would use my 1966 Honda sports car as transportation. The day before leaving Sydney, Rob and I covered all the chrome with masking tape to protect it from being pitted by tall stones. As a precaution, we also covered the bonnet for the same reason. After leaving Sydney, we drove north through Newcastle and Port Macquarie. Fortunately, we had no problems and easily reached the Gold Coast and Surfers Paradise before making camp just north of Brisbane. I began to think that the Aussies were having a joke on me with all the horror stories I had heard about driving. The first morning after waking up in camp, Rob showed me how to properly make Billy tea. He walked me through the almost sacred steps so I could become a purist in the art. I think from that day until the last day of our trip, making tea properly was my responsibility. Rob was driving just north of Maryborough when we got pulled over by the cops for speeding. They were in a Ford Falcon. We suspected they only stopped us to look at my car. It was, after all, an unusual car to be seen outside of the big city. After writing the speeding ticket, one of the cops asked if he could see what was under the bonnet. We obliged, and when they saw the 4 carburetors, the old sergeant said, "Holy jumping fishes, how fast does this thing go?" I proudly said, 100 plus, to which he replied, "Jesus, lucky yous blokes didn't step on the gas, 'cause we never would have caught yous." Camping out every night under the southern sky was one of the best parts of the trip. Because Australia was so sparsely inhabited, there was never a problem finding a secluded area to make camp. Taking our time and enjoying the scenery, we continued north through Gladstone, crossed the Tropic of Capricorn just north of Rockhampton, then went on through Mackay and Townsville. Cairns is a small city on the North Queensland coast. It was the furthest north we intended to go. Because it's north of the Tropic of Capricorn, it's subtropical there. It was at Cairns that we had our first bit of trepidation about camping out. We knew we'd be sleeping in a jungle while staying in the area, so we asked the attendant at a petrol station our first night there if we should worry about snakes. His response wasn't exactly reassuring. "Snakes? No, mate. The crocs ate 'em all." Rob and I took turns that night sitting up with a rifle to avoid becoming croc food. From Cairns we headed southwest and into the outback, stopping at the local in every small town for grog and a needed respite from driving. Being strangers always brought us attention whenever we walked into a pub. In addition, everyone's curiosity was piqued when I spoke and they realized I was a Yank. On the Atherton tablelands, we stopped at a Bushy's pub. At this pub, one of the patrons asked, "What are you blokes driving?" I pointed under the pub's swinging doors and said, "That." He saw my car and said, "Holy crap, what the bloody hell is that? Hey blokes, come and have a look-see." With that, he and all of his mates poured out of the bar to examine my little Honda. Leaving the Atherton tablelands, driving quickly became challenging. The roads were dirt, and they were the only roads available. Sheep trucks had created very deep ruts in them. My car couldn't straddle the center ridge, so we drove hundreds of miles with the right wheels on the outside ridge and the left wheels in the rut. The one saving grace was that there was very little, if any, traffic. As a matter of fact, roads in the outback were so infrequently traveled that it was common to find that vast stretches of roadway had been covered with blowing sand, making it almost impossible to find the ruts. The deeper we went into the outback, the more difficult driving became. We noticed in these small outback towns that the guys in the pubs always seemed to know who we were when we walked in, almost as if they had been expecting us. If Rob ordered us a couple of beers, someone would ask him if we were from Sydney, and then ask him if I was the Yank. When he confirmed they were right, everybody, again, would pile outside to see my car. Afterwards, invariably they would buy us all the grog we wanted for as long as we stayed, asking us about where we had been and where we were going. Offers for us to camp on local stations were common. Their genuine interest and friendliness was impressive. On one such visit at a pub, we asked how it was that they seemed to know who we were. Their answer was a little disconcerting. Evidently, because of the vast distances between towns in the outback and the difficult driving conditions, it wasn't unusual for people to get lost and stranded. We learned that after we left a local, people would get on the radio to contact the next town on our itinerary. The same radio network that served the Flying Doctors and the School of the Air also served to alert others of our progress. If we didn't show up within a reasonable time, a search would be launched. It was just assumed we would check in at a local whenever we got to the next town. It was on the Mount Garnett-Hewiden Road where we had a problem that we thought just might cause a search. We lost sight of the road and then ran into a ditch just at dark. We dug for hours but couldn't get the car unstuck. As we were digging, we had been watching headlights coming towards us for about 30 minutes. When the headlights were finally close enough to illuminate us, the car screeched to a halt in a cloud of dust. The doors opened, and out stepped 6 huge Yugoslavian bridge builders. They told us they had been thrown out of a pub because they were drunk, so they were driving 120 miles to the next pub, absolutely flat out, hoping to get there before closing time. They surrounded my car and actually lifted it out of the ditch and put it back on the dirt road. Although there pretty much was only one road, we asked them the best way to get to the next town on our itinerary. One of the blokes who could speak broken English saw a damp spot in the middle of the dusty road, so he crouched down and drew a map for us. The damp spot was where Rob had taken a leak earlier when we were trying to dig our way out. We thanked them, and they took off in a cloud of dust, determined to beat closing time. After one long day's drive in Queensland, we decided to make early camp near some unusually large boulders. However, after setting up camp, we realized they weren't boulders at all. They were anthills. There were hundreds of them, some small and others that were probably 10 feet tall. Sometimes these anthills were even built in the road because there was so little traffic to knock them down. We also saw so many large flocks of galahs that at one point we decided to try our luck at getting fresh meat. So one night at a local, we asked the patrons if they knew how we should cook one. One of the blokes told us, with a straight face, that we should put a brick in the pot with the parrot. When the brick was done, so was the parrot. We decided to stick with our usual diet. In Broken Hill, the westernmost point of our trip, we stayed several days with family friends of Rob's family. I remember that they didn't have an indoor toilet. They used an outhouse in their backyard. The first time I used it, I heard a loud voice ask, "What you doing, mate?" I froze. After finishing my business and walking outside, I saw a pet cockatoo in the tree that could speak unusually well. When it saw me, it started making laughing sounds. The family we stayed with in Broken Hill had a daughter who attended secondary school. Because I was a Yank, it was decided that she and Rob would take me to my first Aussie Rules football game. After arriving at the field, I innocently asked her which team she was going to root for. Rob instantly went white as a ghost, and the girl's expression froze. Rob was standing behind her looking at me and violently shaking his head and waving his hands, indicating I should shut up. Evidently, root in Australia has a strong sexual connotation. In effect, I had asked her which team she services sexually. The correct term I should have used was, "Which team do you barrack for?" After going 1,200 feet underground into a lead mine, we left Broken Hill and headed south to Mildura, and then east to Hay and Grongrong. We stayed with Rob's brother Dennis at Cootamundra for a couple of days before returning to Sydney. The highlight there was when some of Dennis's friends took us out shooting hares a couple of times. These night shoots from a moving vehicle were fun. Eating the hares wasn't. By the time we returned to Rob's home in Sydney, my car's hood was covered with the names of some of the places we had visited. We had seen a large part of Australia and experienced much of what makes that country unique. In total, we had driven about 3,600 miles, 1,800 of that on dirt roads.